Hey everybody, Doug here, Waterfront Wreck, and welcome back to the channel. So we've got this wall behind me I was working on, had to kind of get that header shimmed out. We had a trimmer stud I wanted to replace because it was kind of bad. And anyway, we got this all drywalled here, and we've got all this ceiling drywalled as well. So time to move on to mud and tape and get this thing done so we can send it over to the paint shop, which is Jody. Going to be using paper tape for the ceiling seams instead of the yellow fiberglass tape. It's more prone to cracking. It's not as strong of a bond, especially if I'm going to be storing stuff up here and walking around a little bit and putting some weight up on these rafters, or rather these ceiling joists. I want to make sure I don't get any cracks going on up there, so I'm going to use paper tape. I'll use the fiberglass tape for wall joints, but not for ceiling. Okay, so today we're back on the living room ceiling drywall project. All I had done up to this point is tape the seams, and that's always a little rough when you just do one coat of mud up on the seam. So what I'm doing today is I'm coming in and I'm widening that seam, that joint rather, and feathering it out a little bit more, even though I don't need to be perfect because Jody's going to come in and do her hand-trowel type plaster texture. I want to get these joints feathered out a little bit more off to the side so that when the ceiling is finished, you don't see any ridges, any shadow lines, or where one drywall panel meets another drywall panel, if you will. I mentioned before, that we're pretty much doing in most of the areas of the house a kind of a plaster hand-troweled plaster effect. We really don't like orange peel spray texture. We don't really like the traditional heavy spray texture knockdown on the ceilings. We like, this house is built in the 60s, but we're kind of going for like we're calling it a mid-century cottage kind of vibe. And we like the character of a little bit more hand-applied texture, like a plaster, like an old plaster effect. Although we are using drywall mud to achieve it, we have a special trowel that Jody uses. It's actually a squeegee trowel, probably about 20 inches long. I mix up the mud, a little bit more liquidy, and then she applies it with the heavy nap roller, like a small weenie roller, like a 3/4 or 1 inch nap, pretty heavy, so it holds a lot of mud. And she can just roll in a section and just start working her squeegee trowel, wiping it off, keeping things wet. And we really like the effect that that gives us. One beautiful benefit of that is, for me, is I don't have to be super duper tight on all my mud work. I put a couple coats of mud on my tape and my seam and turn it over to her, because she's putting it on heavy enough that any imperfections in my tape work or my joints, that all disappears after she gets a couple coats of her texture on. So the best part of that is I don't have to sand. And that's the worst part of mud work, in my opinion, is you get the first couple coats on, you got to come in with a sanding stick or sanding sponges, and you're spending a day just putting all that mud back on the floor in the form of what looks like powdered sugar, and it's all over you. You got to wear a respirator. It's really awkward sanding up over your head. It's just a pain. And so I love her texture. Okay, so I got all these joints up on the ceiling and the walls. Their second coat of mud. Feathered them out a bit, get them ready for Jody's texture process. And yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about it. So I'm going to use this metal corner trim for this outside corner. And I've got a couple little tricks on these. I've done quite a few of them now. And I've kind of learned some stuff online, and also just trial and error for me. But I thought I'd maybe pass along a couple tips that I found helpful. I like to just take my knife like that. You should see that gap. Again, if it's rotated out too far, it'll be like that, and that's not going to be good because you're going to have to build up a ton of mud there. So it should be about centered. But to find it on center is kind of tricky because you can't just tell if it's centered just by pushing it on there. But you can tell this way. So if I put my knife there, you'll see I've got a nice little shadow gap there. And if I rotate it over to this other side, I can see if I have a similar gap, a bigger gap, a smaller gap, or whatever. So again, I'll just double check, make sure I got equidistant spacing between my knife and the strip corner. I'll come in here, put a staple there, put a staple there, and come in and double check it. Make sure it didn't rotate during the stapling process. And if I zoom up on that staple, you'll see that that sits nice and past flush. So it's gonna not go anywhere, but at the same time, it's not gonna catch my knife or cause problems or distort the strip. And so what I'll do is I'll just kind of go all the way up and all the way down from the middle, checking with my knife, maybe every 4, 5, 6 inches, making sure that that gap is proper on both sides. And then I'll just staple it all the way up, staple it all the way down, and then I'll have a corner bead that's nice and centered to my corner, and it'll be ready for some mud work. Hold it, tack it. So here's what I'm using to staple it. It's just these 1/4 inch narrow crowned staples by 1 inch long. And this is a little Porter cable gun, but you could probably buy a cheapo on Harbor Freight or whatever. And they hold it really good. I staple it about every, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches. I kind of staple the crap out of it because you don't want that moving around. It could cause cracks in your mud. And you don't want a little tick sticking out when you're trying to mud your knife your mud into that corner, because it'll just keep sticking out and hitting your knife. So I just staple it like every 3 or 4 inches. So I staple them pretty close to the edge, because what you're trying to do is keep this edge here out of the way of your knife. When you're bridging from here to the corner, you don't want metal popping up and hitting your knife. And so instead of, stapling them in closer, if you come in back to this edge, you're going to hit the stud, because the stud's going to be a 1/2 inch away from here, because you got this thickness of the opposing side of drywall. So you want to come back here and hit them on that edge. And looks like I could use 1 or 2 more staples on this side. So today we're going to be doing some texture on the ceilings and maybe some walls. We'll see how far we get. These are the tools that we'll be using. We got a bucket of clean water. We got a bucket of mud with 1.5 water bottles, which is 16-ounce bottles, 1.5 of those, and whip this up with the paddle to get it nice and frothy and creamy, a little bit smoother and thinner, because Jody uses her roller with the 3/4 inch snap roller to actually get it up on the walls and ceilings.
At first it's a little, there we go.
It's just an easy way to get it applied to the substrate before you come in and trowel it. And then for troweling, we use this squeegee trowel that we got on Amazon. We'll try to find a link that we can maybe put in the notes, but it's just a Wizard Squeegee by Bond, B-O-N Tool Company. And it's pretty long. It's probably a good 15 inches long. So she uses her weenie roller with the 3/4 inch snap. You could also use a 1 inch snap, but we couldn't find any. We actually went to 4 stores.
I like Smaller roller.
just to find 3/4 inch nap. It's just too much to handle and too heavy to use a regular 9-inch roller.
When you're
It holds so much mud, you're gonna make a mess, and it's really hard on the old arms and shoulders.
When you're a Wimpleton.
Yeah, when you're a Wimpleton. So Jody really likes to
A
use
smaller.
the Winnie rollers for a lot of paint and this kind of application.
Like this. This is just the first coat
Yep, we do a couple, she does a couple coats.
until it looks the way we want it.